As I said before, velocity control is the most natural and intuitive method for controlling dynamics because all we have to do is use normal keyboard or piano technique to create changes in the tone and volume of the notes we play. So with that in mind, here's a question I've seen asked numerous times on discussion forums about velocity and its role in creating crescendo and decrescendo gestures. And the question usually goes something like, "Hi, I have a note playing a string sound and I want it to crescendo. Is there any way to update the velocity value to do that?" Well, the answer here is no, and that's because the velocity value is part of a bundle or a package of information sent from your controller when you play a note. And I showed this earlier in the course that when you play a note, you generate a MIDI note on message, and it contains 3 pieces of information: the MIDI channel, the note number, and the velocity value. So once that package is sent, the velocity value can't be updated for that note. The only way to do that would be to actually restrike the note at a higher velocity value. But doing that is going to cause the note to reattack. And even if you created a series of repeating notes with increasing velocity values, it'll end up sounding like a repeating gesture. Now, there's a function in many DAWs that will let you force the notes to be legato so that the end of one butts up against the start of the next. And the idea here is that by making the gaps between these repeated notes really tight, it might create a blur of sound that resembles the sound of a crescendo. Now, that's just kind of okay, and it's not nearly the same realistic sound as you would get if you had a sample library that actually gave you control over dynamics, like this one from Cinematic Strings. So how can we create crescendos and diminuendos with sounds that are just velocity sensitive? Well, you kind of can and you kind of can't. And here's the deal. Most velocity sensitive instruments don't offer the option to let us adjust the dynamic level after we play the note. And since the whole idea of velocity control is derived from piano or keyboard technique, velocity control of the dynamics of a sound is really best suited for those sounds which share the same basic shape as piano notes. And what I mean are sounds that start suddenly or have a quick attack, right after which the sound starts to fade out or die or decay. In fact, all of the sounds that I described earlier in the course as keyboard-friendly sounds all have this same basic gestural shape. The graphic representation of the shape of a sound is called a volume envelope, or simply envelope. And for sounds like these, there's no expectation that a performer would somehow be able to reverse the decaying of a sound and cause it to crescendo back to full volume, which is why writing a part like this for piano would make absolutely no sense unless it included a performance instruction to first play the chord and then send the piano hurtling towards the audience. But exactly that kind of gesture, a sharp attack followed by a diminuendo followed by a big crescendo, is certainly the kind of gesture that we could write for orchestra. And all without having to endanger the audience. So for sounds like the ones on this list, the velocity value associated with the onset of each note is all we really need to control dynamics. But of course, our libraries also contain all manner of instruments which don't decay in piano-like fashion, and in fact they will sustain for as long as you hold down the keys. And of course I'm talking about strings, brass, and woodwind sounds. And it's not at all unusual for these sounds to be velocity sensitive. And of course that's absolutely fine for all kinds of passages, even ones like this sustained oboe sound, which is only velocity sensitive, playing a crescendo. The reason this works to create an effective sounding crescendo is because the notes are, well, 2 reasons actually. First, it's because the notes are being played quickly enough that the successive increase in velocity from note to note isn't perceived as a series of incremental steps in timbre, although that's exactly what's going on. And that's exactly what we heard earlier on in the unsuccessful attempt to create a crescendo by increasing the velocity on a series of string notes. But the reason I was able to create a successful, realistic sounding crescendo with a velocity-sensitive oboe sound is because, unlike the string passage, the notes are moving. And the fact that the sound has reverb on it helps it all blend together and sound smooth. However, because this is a velocity-sensitive instrument with no provision for changing the dynamics after it's played, we can't get that last note to crescendo if we wanted it to say, crescendo along with some crescendoing orchestral accompaniment. Or what about when a single sustaining note, like this Vienna solo violin tremolo note, needs to crescendo after the note is played? You know, like a real player. Well, what do? Exactly. So, of course, velocity is useful for setting the initial dynamic level of sustained sounds, but after that, that's it. We're done. So, if you want to create dynamic changes after the note is played, we kind of hit the wall with velocity. So in this section of the course, I'll be showing you the various options there are for controlling dynamics on sustained sounds, including those which are only velocity sensitive.